All right, and we are live for episode 2 of the Bioactive Nexus podcast. I'm Dr. Bill, and I have with me,
Professor Gene. How y'all
right.
doing? Thanks for coming and joining us. We're excited to have our second episode.
Yes, we are. So we have an awesome schedule or agenda today, and pretty in-depth topics here. So Gene's going to start us off on magnesium. There's a lot to talk about magnesium and magnesium salts. And then I'm going to get into analytical testing and a little history as well for those that have been around the industry as long as we have. So in terms of that, so it'll be fun. So Gene, housekeeping. So again, go follow us on the Bioactive Nexus page on LinkedIn. We stream live to LinkedIn. This is where our network is and colleagues are, but we actually go out to the whole network of LinkedIn. We're also we're not streaming live in other platforms yet, but we have a YouTube page channel and also a Facebook channel as well. So we're slowly building out our social media footprint. If you have comments, questions, we got a lot of great feedback from the first episode. Gene, I know you did, and I did as well separately. People actually went to the website and sent in comments as well. Please continue to do that. The topics you guys would like to hear.
Please do.
Yeah. And also, we're looking for testimonials for people who've listened to the show to give us their feedback so we can share that with other potential listeners. So if you guys can do that, would be awesome. Gene, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Bill said is that, we want to know what topics you're really interested in having us address. And if you're interested in something, let us know. We are thrilled to hear from you and potentially include that. In fact, my topic today, a colleague of mine said, you really should talk about this. And I went, that's a great idea. And that's how we got the first topic for today.
That's
and
right.
That seems like a good segue.
It's a good segue. And so we're going to go straight into that one.
Sounds like a hot topic. Okay.
It's a hot topic. There you go.
All right. So
Gene.
Magnesium. Yes. I'm going to talk a little bit about magnesium. In fact, we're both going to talk about magnesium, but
Yeah.
I'm going to intro it here. So, according to data from our own government, 61% of adults and 36% of children don't get a sufficient amount of magnesium. Furthermore, when you consider that magnesium is needed for bone health, for cell membranes, for chromosomes, for more than 300 metabolic reactions, including the production of ATP, the energy currency in our body, and needed it for nucleic acids and proteins and carbohydrates and glutathione and nerve impulses and muscle contractions and heart rhythm and everything else.
Sleep and everything else.
Yeah,
stress.
So
don't forget
many,
that.
Exactly. And in fact, if I were to summarize magnesium's, major contribution or the major reason most people use it, I would talk about relaxation and calm, the effect on muscles, the effect on sleep, the effect on blood pressure and other areas. And not surprisingly, the global market for magnesium is over $10 billion in 2022 and projected to hit over $19 billion by 2030. So it is a big deal. So with that background,
well, and it's a big deal because it used to be calcium for years was the leading mineral.
Yeah, I remember that.
Magnesium has kind of taken the lead on that. I think there's some industry news on that last year, but for sure. And actually, do you know why magnesium works for sleep and stress and all that? Because it targets the GABA A receptor. So it affects mood and that sort of thing. So magnesium, definitely an important mineral. You should be taking it every day.
You should. I do. Now, that leads to the question, how much do you need? Well, the current daily value for magnesium is 420 milligrams for adults. And, somewhere in that range is reasonable. But, the funniest thing to me about magnesium is when something becomes hot and starts becoming a good seller, it's not at all unusual in the industry to start finding another form of magnesium and another form of magnesium. And I like to call it the magnesium salt flavor of the month.
Yeah, really.
It's like It's like I remember when magnesium citrate was kind of the hot one, and then it was
Yeah.
magnesium glycinate, which is still hot, and then magnesium
Yeah.
threonate, and you just see, all of
Oh,
these different magnesium
and
salts.
before that, it was always magnesium oxide was the original one,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And then
Magnesium
people
oxide,
said, "Oh no, that's like eating rocks, whatever. It's not bioavailable." Yeah. So
which
anyway,
of
go.
course isn't really true. It is bioavailable. Now, are certain other forms of magnesium more bioavailable? Yes, but we'll get there in a minute. There's a couple of things that I think is important to understand. If we need 420 milligrams of magnesium a day or somewhere in that area, then what's most important is getting a sufficient amount of actual elemental magnesium. And for those of you who don't know or aren't familiar with the term elemental in this context, consider that, let's say magnesium citrate, for example. Part of that magnesium compound is magnesium and part of it is citrate. In the case of magnesium citrate, you got about 16% or so that's actually magnesium, and the rest is citrate. In the case of magnesium threonate, one of the more popular ones, it's only got about 7.2% elemental magnesium. Magnesium glycinate, about 14%. Um, you know, Magnesium oxide has been kind of relegated to the red-haired stepchild of magnesium salts,
Yeah.
although it contains 58% elemental magnesium. Okay, and so the whole issue here is, okay, some magnesium salts are preferred for one reason or another. For example, let's say you're doing a powder or you're doing something that you're going to taste the magnesium, and you need it, and also you
Or
need it to be
gummy.
very solid, or gummy, right? And you need it to be very soluble. Well, in that case, you might use a magnesium citrate because that would be an appropriate choice. It's very soluble, its taste isn't quite as strong, so that's a good choice. But if you're doing a capsule or tablet and you want to maximize your magnesium, you might choose magnesium oxide because it's 58% magnesium. But the naysayers will say, but no, 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 no. Magnesium oxide isn't so well absorbed. You'd be better off with these others. And again, I'm going to get to that in a minute. But let me also say, hey, if let's look at, say, magnesium threonate for a minute, because that's one of the hot ones out there right now.
Right.
And sure enough, there is published research showing that magnesium threonate does have cognitive benefits. But the dose that you need to take is about 2,000 milligrams of magnesium threonate, which will yield about 144 milligrams of elemental magnesium. But that's okay, because if you're taking it for its cognitive effects rather than to meet your daily intake of magnesium, then that's fine. Take 2,000 milligrams of magnesium threonate, get 144 milligrams of magnesium. That particular magnesium salt has been shown to have some benefits for that purpose. But speaking of magnesium threonate, there's a trend that I've seen that I just despise, and I got to share it with you. The trend
Don't hold back,
is,
Gene. Don't hold back.
yeah, I know. The trend is false liposomes. Okay. Sometimes you see products that claim to be liposomes, and they're not. I wrote an article a while back for Vitamin Retailer magazine talking about that, about the fact that there's real and there's false. But the easiest way to tell, if you see a product that says it's liposomal magnesium threonate, keep this in mind. Okay? If it takes 2,000 milligrams of magnesium threonate to yield 144 milligrams of elemental
Magnesium. Yeah.
yeah. If you were to apply liposomal technology for it, now you've got the phospholipid there, you've got the liposome. Now your compound would contain even less elemental magnesium. Okay? If that were the case, then no longer would 2,000 milligrams of that compound provide 144 milligrams of elemental
Right.
magnesium. It would contain less. And yet, on these products claiming to be liposomal magnesium threonate, it'll still say 2,000 milligrams of magnesium threonate providing 144 milligrams of elemental magnesium. Well, clearly they're lying. That's not correct. It doesn't. That is not a liposome. One of them I saw actually listed separately on a separate line item in the supplement facts box, it listed phospholipids as a separate line item. In other words, they took a handful of lecithin, tossed it in the mix, blended
Right.
it and said, waved a magic wand and said, it's a liposome. It's not a liposome.
No.
It's not.
No.
All it is plain old magnesium threonate mixed with something called liposome. So let's first get that off the table, that there's some false ones out there, and avoid that. Okay, now that I got off my soapbox, I want to share with you sort of what the reality is regarding, hey, different magnesium salts have better absorption than say magnesium oxide, and so therefore you're better off using these other magnesium salts. Let's take a different look at that. I actually prepared a little graphic that I'm going to have Bill pull up for me. If you would be so kind, Bill, as to pull up this graphic, I want to share with you what a single study showed. So this is not new information. In fact, back in 2001, the American Journal of Therapeutics did a study where they compared different magnesium salts, citrate, oxide, chloride, gluconate, glycinate. And what they found was, of the magnesium citrate that they took, you absorbed 29.64%, and the magnesium oxide, 22.8%, and so forth and so on. You can see with each of the different salts how much you absorbed. Now, this is a better study to look at than individual studies. We say, well, we did a study on this magnesium and found this level of absorption. And you can't compare one study to another study that may have used different methods. Exactly. This study used the same method for everything, all in one study. Mm-hmm. So while citrate, for example, was the best absorbed in this group, you look at the difference in absorption between citrate and oxide, and you realize that there's less than a 7% difference in absorption.
Not much difference.
That's not huge. No. But let's just take that citrate and let's just take oxide and let's do a comparison. Let's do an apples to apples comparison. Let's say you took 680 milligrams of the magnesium salt, 680 milligrams of magnesium citrate, 680 milligrams of magnesium oxide. So at about 16% elemental magnesium, that 680 milligrams of magnesium citrate would yield 109 milligrams of elemental magnesium. Okay. And that 680 milligrams of magnesium oxide would yield 400 milligrams of elemental magnesium. Okay. So using the data on the left side of the screen on how much you actually absorb them, if you absorb 29.64% of the magnesium from magnesium citrate, you'd get 32.64 milligrams in your bloodstream. Using that same amount of magnesium salt from magnesium oxide, if you absorb 22.8%, you'd end up with 91.2%.
This is actually great, Gene.
Almost three times more from the less absorbed form of magnesium, right? So my point here, guys, is when it comes to magnesium, if you're taking magnesium for the purpose of getting magnesium, okay, for all the things that magnesium does in the body, all right, don't be afraid of magnesium oxide. That's what I personally take, okay? There are plenty of studies demonstrating the efficacy of magnesium oxide. It still gets absorbed at a slightly less level than some of the others, but the amount you end up with in your bloodstream, because it has so much more elemental magnesium, is much higher. So, I'm not poo-pooing all the other magnesium salts. Different magnesium salts have been studied and shown to have different benefits, and there's reasons at times for using them, okay? But, magnesium oxide isn't the red-haired stepchild.
Well, it's complicated, Gene. Do you need the screen still? Are we good?
Oh, no, you can take that off.
Okay. So I love what you're talking about because actually last year I spent a bunch of time for a product that we had on the market. We were looking at the differences between magnesium salts, and you're right. There's different methods for doing that test or whatever in terms of bioavailability, that sort of thing, or absorption, in vitro, in vivo. But if you remember way back, we didn't have all these organic salts. It was actually Albion Minerals that came out with the chelated minerals
Right.
and that sort of thing.
I remember.
And the whole pitch was more bioavailability. Well, when you, at the end of the day, and that may be true in some instances, but I did a hard search last year and put together, compiled a table of every magnesium salt that's in every supplement product, not just in the U.S., globally, because some aren't allowed in certain markets, and tried to find all the research. There is no research study that compares all the salts by the same method. You've got one that compares a subset, but there is no study that does that. There's a lot of one-offs that show certain salts are actually better than others, maybe. But again, it's comparing apples to oranges. You go look at another study, and maybe for a different salt, but they use a different method. So how do you really know, right? I think
That's right.
you called it out. It's important. So at the end of the day, magnesium, anything it is bound into as a salt is an ionic compound. Okay, I'm going to put on my chemist hat here, right? So when you put it in solution, which is water, which your body's made up of water, guess what happens? You get the cation, magnesium, and you get the anion, which is whatever the salt is. It doesn't matter. And the magnesium is what gives the benefit. Now, where it's delivered through the GI tract is where it's important, right? And so this is kind of cool that you show that today, Gene. It's really awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I do think it's important. And again, I don't discourage anybody from using any other magnesium salt that they may want to use for whatever reason. You know, there are reasons.
Well, there's
to
consumer
use different
perception.
ones.
There's consumer perception as well. So
Perception is reality.
perception is
In
reality
marketing.
in our business. So I mean, it changes, right? So, like you said, 3 and 8 is like the hot one now. Everybody's looking at that. Well, okay, so there's some data. The bottom line is do the science, do the testing, show that your product actually has that, right? And that's not even counting, Gene, if we did combinations of salts, right?
Absolutely. You find a lot of them where you blend salts together to make it look a little sexier. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that at the end of the day, you need to have sufficient amount of magnesium. That's what's important. If you can get an adequate amount of magnesium, all right, from a reasonable source, that's what you need, you know?
Yeah, and getting it to
that's the issue.
it's going to get absorbed in the small intestine, so that's where you want to get it to. So,
That's right.
anyway, so I think, and I've seen some studies, by the way, with products that had different salts and combinations, and there were some differences in combinations. So,
Sure.
you know, maybe there is something to do that. It affects pH, well, not for pH so much, but the pK values are different, which is you know, are different for the different salts. Which is what that means is there's a dissociation constant, you know, technically for salts in terms of their ability to completely separate from the cation and anion. So I know we're getting too technical here, guys, but
Yeah,
again,
but you know, you do make a point that I think is worth just expanding upon for a moment, and when you have a mixture of these different salts and you don't know how much you have of one or the other because it's a proprietary blend, you know, I'll tell you a dirty little secret that's often done in formulation. They look at the one that has maybe the highest elemental potency, therefore you can use the least, you don't have to use as much, and you make that the first. You could put in 99% of one salt, or let's say you have 5 salts, you could put in 95% of one, and then 1% of another, 1% of another, 1% of another, and it's really just one salt with a little sprinkling of the others. It's not necessarily an equal blend or any particular scientific blend. It's just a sexy blend, you know. So at the end of the day, you don't know what you're getting in the blends. It might be good, it might be whatever.
no,
So just wanted to share that with you guys.
yeah, I think our take-home message here is that you got to do research and science. We've done that, and that there's ingredient companies will tell you their salt's better absorbing to that. If they got clinical data to show that, okay, great. But usually they don't have it showing it against multiple other salts. It's usually a small subset.
They
or
don't.
Something.
And again, even if it is better absorbed, how much better? And not only how much better, but what do you end up with in your bloodstream at the end of all that?
Right.
What do you end up with? In the example I gave, you still ended up with a whole lot more, 3 times more magnesium from magnesium oxide as you did from well-absorbed citrate, just because there's so much less magnesium and
Right.
magnesium citrate. So those are things everybody needs to keep in mind, whether you're formulating. And the reality is, I get it. If you're a formulator out there, if you're a brand owner, you need to have a product that's going to be attractive. And you go, hey, if I just do plain magnesium oxide, everybody's not going to love it. I get it. You might want to do a blend. You might want to do something else, But
Right.
just don't get suckered into the belief that, well, I only have to use this much now because it's so much better absorbed. No, you still need the same amount of magnesium at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
You still
It's still
need your
it's
400
whatever the
plus
amount of
milligrams.
elemental, right? The amount of elemental magnesium gets delivered, right? It's less as you add,
That's
as you go
right.
down the table, and the salts get bigger. Then it's like very small percentage of magnesium. Then, and of course, then you got horse pills, or it's got to go in powders, and then okay, yes, it's probably good for gummies, like because then you don't have that aftertaste or whatever. It's a real challenge for gummies, or any kind of liquids if you've got a high dose in there. So, but again, these things don't change, right? In formulation, right? It's still the same challenges, limitations on dosage formats, and all of that. And you got to marry that up with two other things: consumers, what they want, and consumer perception. Yeah, you can try and change consumer perception, but it's going to take a lot of data to do that and do the research,
That's
and
hard.
that's hard to do. So then, okay, and that's why we have trends and hot topics and stuff like that, like we're talking about today. And then you have the analytical piece of this, which is a good segue, I
Good
believe,
segue.
into analytical testing for our
It's
next
a hot topic. Hot. I love that.
Yes. Good segue into our next topic, analytical testing. Wow. Do I have a lot to talk about on this one, Gene? So, for example, we'll get to this later, but just 2 days ago, Amazon changed their requirements, increased what they want from sellers on their platform, and they're the biggest online retailer of dietary supplements. I actually agree with what they're doing because I think it's great. But we'll get to that part there. But let's give it some context and some history here, right? So if you go back, beginning days of Deshay, there were no testing laboratories that tested botanicals or anything like that. I
Oh
mean,
no.
nothing. And I know this firsthand from experience, So if I go back to 1997 and 98, okay, um, I can tell I was director of R&D for a company called PharmaPrint, and we signed a deal with Whitehall Robbins, and that's, Centrum, okay, brand. And in 1998 was the year that Big Pharma got into, or those consumer healthcare businesses got into botanicals. They never touched them before. It's just vitamins and minerals. That's it. Never touched botanicals. So, and Matt, if you think it's challenging today with analytical testing, and it still is, by the way, we're going to talk about even current stuff. It comes up every day in the news here. Imagine how it was years ago in the late 90s when we didn't even have labs to send samples to test.
I remember.
Okay.
I remember.
And it's not just testing for actives. Nobody was testing to make sure it met label claim or anything like that.
Right.
And then there's the whole scenario of impurities or contaminants, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a
Heavy
story.
metals, micro, all of
Heavy
that.
pesticides, aflatoxins, and actually this happened to us. We had a lot of first during this project. I mean, we had 7 herbal products, the top 7 selling botanicals we were going to launch in 1998. So it was St. John's wort, echinacea, ginkgo, garlic, saw palmetto, ginseng, and valerian. These were the 7 of the top 10 botanicals in the late 90s. Okay, and so everybody was racing to market to do this. Okay, but huge challenges, as you can imagine, because I was director of R&D, I was managing laboratories. We didn't have any methods. We had to develop all the methods for all the testing we did, not just for the raw materials, for all the contaminants, they didn't exist, but also the actives, the analytes or whatever was known at the time anyway, like St. John's wort, total hyperisons, right? Actually, hyperisons are not the active component in St. John's wort. Okay, we found out,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
because we did bioassay testing, so we were way ahead of our time, and this was my start into the supplement industry. So we were like totally raising the bar on this. And I'll just share a quick story. What happened is that we found out that the ginseng supplier, I won't name names here, at that time, because everybody wanted to supply the botanicals for this launch. It was Centrum, right? And
Right.
I should write a book about this because it's a great story. But those that know me in the
Tell
industry may
all.
have, maybe, I tell all, maybe you know that. But there was basically three suppliers worldwide that were going to supply the total of those seven botanicals. Okay, and one of those suppliers uh, informed us that, hey, do you know that there's an issue with ginseng with quinazine? Now, quinazine is a fungicide that's used, and if you know anything about ginseng, it sits in the ground for 5 or 6 years before they harvest the roots, right? It comes from the root. So you get a buildup of that fungicide. It was banned at that time. It was even banned by the EPA in the U.S. So even though there was ginseng farmers, in fact, around the same time, some ginseng farmers in the Midwest somewhere got in trouble with the EPA because of that. They were using it. But still heavily used in Asia. And so one of the other suppliers alerted us to this and said, "Hey, do you know that you've got an issue with that?" And they had a patented process for washing the root before they processed the root and then remove the quinazine. And so the supplier we had, when we brought it to their attention, they knew about it, but they said, "Well, we're not required to test for that." Okay. So and there was no established standard at this time for quinazine. Okay, and so I told the story, and there's more history that comes after this, but this got huge news. Okay, so I remember getting the facts. Remember faxes? I remember getting the facts from
I
the testing.
remember. It was very exciting.
It was exciting, and since there was no standard, there was kind of a guideline on that, basically low levels on parts per billion, but this we tested the ginseng that was going to come from the supplier, and this is when we're in production, right? We haven't even we haven't even we're in the middle of product launch, so tested to like
Did you have to
so
develop the method for quitazine, or did you have a method?
we had it tested by the other supplier who actually had developed a method for that.
Oh,
So they had to do that, and their standard was 10 parts per billion. So we tested this other ginseng supplier, and it turned out it was like, I remember the number still, it's like 680 parts per billion, not 10. So a huge amount.
oh,
Well,
man.
if anyone's been around long enough, they know what
Yeah.
happened after this. This immediately caused a big brouhaha in the industry. I didn't have anything to do with this. It was the CEO of the company at the time, big Wall Street guy, goes out. And I tell you, the FDA does not like finding out about things like this on CNN. This is, CNN at that time was different. So,
Really?
not a way to bring something to the market. But this changed the industry, Gene. You remember this. Because right after that, it caused a big the ripple effect from that was that some number of things. One, all ginseng products on the shelf got removed from the shelf until they got tested when the FDA got involved. Okay, and then the rest is history, as they say. So in the late '90s, that's when consumer labs started. That's when Alchemist Labs started. That's when all these different laboratories. That's when NSF and a whole host of other uh, laboratories were developing certification programs. And I know this very well because NSF approached me at that time. And I remember going to the trade show. The first trade show they launched this, it was like one little row of 10 by 10 booths. And you had NSF, USP, Better Homes and Gardens, Underwriters Laboratory, and some other ones I don't remember. Everyone was getting in the game of certification of supplements and testing, right? This is late 90s, right? 99, 2000, I think, when they were at the show like that. So think about that. How much the industry has matured and changed since then. And we had the birth of all these certification programs. I helped NSF get their program started. We were the first company to help them. And then, of course, several other companies actually joined in later and supplied their methods or whatever. And hey, the rest is history. Now we have labs like really reliable accredited labs that can do all this kind of testing. But even today, Gene, there is still, because the people are developing new extracts and proprietary extracts of botanicals and stuff. There's not a USP approved method that the lab can just run and get the same results. So this is really
No,
key.
no, there's not, and that's one of the problems. I mean, I know I've come across it many times when a lab tests something and they do it by a method that's sort of a different method, and they get a different result. I've seen that happen before with consumer labs. I've seen that happen with other labs, and it's like, wait a minute, you're not using the right method. You're not going to get the right result. And I was telling you the other day a story when I worked at a contract manufacturer, and we used these beta carotene beadlets, and they were coated, and a customer of ours sent them out to be tested at a third-party lab. And said, "Oh, it doesn't have beta carotene in it." We're like, "What?" So we called the lab and said, how did you do it? And it wasn't that they didn't use the right HPLC or whatever. The prep work wasn't right. You have to do a triple wash because you got to get the coating off of it before you can test what's inside of it.
Sure.
And so you got to do a wash once, a second wash, and a third wash to get all the coating off. Then you can test it. We explained that to them. Then they did that, and lo and behold, it tested out correctly, and our customer was happy. But sometimes it's not even just the equipment being used. It's just your prep work in the lab. It's understanding how to do that. And if you don't do it right, you don't get the right result, and then you get false positive, false negatives. All of that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a big deal.
It's still a big deal today. I mean, Now Foods has been doing this now. They've been pulling products off the shelf and testing like consumer labs used to do. Or they still do it. I just don't see that much from them anymore. But again, my first question is, my PhD is in chemistry, organic chemistry, natural products. So I've spent validated dozens and dozens of analytical test methods to measure things in botanicals and all kinds of natural products. So it's not easy. And this is why I think, just in my own professional opinion, I think NSF has the best testing standards they did then and they still do today, because they have the right approach in terms of how to do that. And certainly now other laboratories have come on since, like Alchemist Labs. We're giving a lot of plugs for the right guys here. So, but Eurofins
Alchemist
also
is a good
does
lab. I mean,
and Eurofins does great testing as well.
Eurofins does good. They do pretty much everything,
But you got to do your due diligence here. You got to make sure
you do
whatever they're testing. So if you're a marketer, you're going to be selling on Amazon. I'm going to talk about Amazon's new requirements here in just a minute, which I just posted on LinkedIn today about that. I shared the article from NutraIngredients, but it's very timely because, I know what the challenges were years ago when we started this. We didn't have when we talk about developing and validating an analytical test method, you need to have the standards as well that you're measuring against. Their standards didn't exist.
What? And let's make sure that our listeners all understand what we mean when we say standards. That's not something in a book. That's an actual sample of a material that you're comparing it against.
Exactly.
You can buy it from Chrominex or one of these places where they'll actually have that sample that you could say, okay, here's what I'm comparing it to. And without that, it's pretty hard to test.
I mean, vitamin C is ascorbic acid, so you can buy that from any chemical supplier or whatever and test that. That's easy. Botanicals are a real challenge and still are today, guys. That hasn't changed. When you talk about natural products and botanicals, it's a whole different ballgame, because you imagine you have a plant and you probably have several hundred components in there to measure, right? And you get interferences and the way that it's extracted, whether it's produced in terms of the raw material, is really important too. And this is something else we discovered when we tested all the raw materials back for in the day, and that is no two St. John's wort or no two echinacea raw materials are the same, because you not only have variability in terms of extraction methods, in terms of production. We've certainly got more sophisticated today. Manufacturers, ingredient suppliers do a great job. But where are they sourcing the plant too? This is all about farm to table sort of thinking in terms of sustainability, as well as where are they getting the plants from that they're doing that from? They're buying it from some market, or do they have a relationship directly with the farm, or are they vertically integrated and have their own farms? Okay, that's where you really control the quality of that raw material. Okay, because you have seasonal variability. We saw this. We saw difference is in that not only do we screen for analytical testing against botanical suppliers or raw materials, but we also looked at their bioactivity as well. Nobody was doing this. This is late 90s. We were doing bioassays to determine biological activity. So, so it's really important to understand that you can't just take a sample of a particular product. Not we're talking a finished product. Okay, so you may have multiple components in there too as well. So like you said, Gene, the sample prep is really important, like in terms of that. So, and you may have a validated test method. Maybe it's a USP method or it's something the lab developed itself.
Right.
However, if you wanted to take that method and transfer it to another lab, there's validation procedures to do to make sure, because I know for a fact, if you go take a lab method and send it to another lab and they test it, they don't get the same result with the same lot that they tested because they didn't do something right in terms of that. They didn't validate it, right?
And just so everybody knows, the same lab can test the same thing and test it 3 times in a row and not get exactly the same. It'll be pretty close. But, but you may not get exactly the same because while it is a validated science, everything isn't perfect every single time. So you try to look at, so again, that's why it's so important even with the right method and even with the right validation, there's some variations. Imagine what you get if you don't use the right method and it's all over the board.
You get 0 results.
Got to use you got to use a good quality accredited lab, and you've got to you make sure they're following the right results. And today, I mean, in this industry, there's a lot of places that just aren't doing it, and others that are taking it to a whole new level, which makes me think about companies like Now who are going out and testing a bunch of people's stuff.
I think it's great because this industry's always been about self-regulation in itself, and if we're relying on the FDA to do what they want to do, I mean, which leads me to discuss Amazon's new testing requirements. Okay, so
yes, do
December,
that. Amazon changes their requirements a lot.
So now it's December 2020. They came out with, you need to provide a C of A as part of their seller's agreement or whatever. And they're the biggest online retailer of supplements, no question, hands down. But you want to talk about bad products being sold on Amazon? Oh, yeah, they're there. And we talk about bad actors in the industry. Well, that's almost impossible to enforce. I don't care how much resources the government has to do that. There's no way to police thousands and thousands of people. You never know where those products are coming. And by the way, it's not a problem just for the U.S. It's other markets as well, because I've taken products in other countries. You have stuff online, even in pharmacies, like in shelf in Mexico, the product is not even approved by COFEPRIS. Okay, so it happens everywhere. It's not just the U.S. So let's make that clear. So Amazon now is saying, okay, we want your C of A and test results, but now we want them directly from the lab. So they're not going to let you filter those results and send them something else. So NSF and Eurofins have teamed up with Amazon to have a portal to directly send those results there. Personally, I think it's a great thing. If you're really responsible about the products you're marketing, you want quality products that are not only meet label claim, but also are safe, well, then you should be doing that testing anyway. Okay. And if you're not, shame on you. And so that's
totally agree with that, Bill. And before the show, I know it's not the topic for today, but I just want to mention this because it just bugs me a little bit. I love what Amazon's doing. I just wish they would extend that same level of concern to themselves and not say, oh, if you're going to have your products sold by us, then you have to sign a document saying that it'll withstand temperatures of up to 155 degrees in our warehouse. I just wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they'd move that to a temperature.
If it's a gummy, what's going to happen to a gummy at 150 degrees at long term? It's going to melt. It's going to melt.
And there's some nutraceuticals that are heat sensitive. So if you're going to go through all this trouble and do all the testing and show it's right, then please, whoever's storing it, store it correctly. That's all.
Yeah. So I'll share one last story here, which something last year, okay, so just to stress the importance of analytical testing using an accredited lab and making sure and doing your own due diligence on the lab as well to make sure that they've actually, there's certain standards they need to meet. So I'm going to go through what the standards are, and then I'm going to go through the 12-step program to analytical testing success. I'm going to give you 12 steps here. Okay, so if you're in
I
health,
recognize I have a problem with testing.
if you recognize you have a problem with testing, I've got the 12-step program for you here. Okay, so actually, this just happened last year, and I pulled a certain supplier had Botanical that was their proprietary extract, and I happen to know the supplier extremely well, and actually visited their farms, manufacturing. They're vertically integrated. They control their quality and visited their labs, everything. But they've developed their own analytical test method because their extract's proprietary, and it looks at a whole host of other standards. Remember, a lot of times in plants you have a class of compounds. Okay, it's not just one analyte. Okay, but there may be one or two that are more prominent than others. Well, and it requires having those particular standards to do the actual testing as well and validate the method. So some colleagues of mine sent this to just a lab of their choice, and guess what? They got 0 results on the testing. Now, this is a very well recognized ingredient with tons of clinical data, and has 2 approved test labs that have the standards that can test their product. So I had to actually take a sample, same lot, and send it to both those labs to send the results to the same lot that they tested at these other labs, and proved that, okay, these guys, and they were a well-known lab, by the way, saying, oh no, there's nothing in there. I know I'm being cryptic about which ingredient it is, I don't want to say, but right. It's not true. So this is just illustrative that if you think about botanicals for a moment, okay, vitamins, minerals, in the supplement facts panel, you have amounts, okay? It either meets label claim or it doesn't, right? And when it gets tested. And there's overages. We're not going to get into that. Well, that's another topic I'll save for another day. In terms of stability loss and manufacturing loss, we'll save that for another day. However, if you look at, if you think about any kind of botanical, a lot of times it just lists the amount, right, Gene? It doesn't say, sometimes it doesn't even say the...
Sure.
The amount of particular active components,
the marker
or whatever,
compound or something, yeah.
The marker compound, whatever it's standardized to. So if it does list that, then of course there's got to be a C of A and testing for that. Well, we have tons of examples and products on the market today that say those things, but there may not be an approved method to do this, okay? Because people are doing more research. They're coming out with new proprietary extracts, okay? So you're going to have to make sure, if you're selling that type of ingredient to your consumers or are going to market it, you need to educate them on this is what you need to do in terms of testing and that sort of thing. So let's segue that into what are the analytical testing standards specifically in regulations and guidances. Okay, so you have ISO IEC 17025, right? That's the international standard for testing the calibration laboratory. So you want a lab that's ISO certified 17025, okay? And also a lab that follows GLPs, good laboratory practice. Okay, that's not it's a guidance. It's not a regulation. It's not a standard or anything, or actual hard standard in terms of testing, but make sure they follow good GLPs, which covers all aspects of a laboratory, right? They're from the organization, personnel, equipment, testing, validating their equipment, that sort of thing. Then you have 21 CFR Part 111 of the FDA regs on current good manufacturing practices, okay, for supplements. So be familiar with those, or at least whoever you're using is familiar with those, right? And yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, the ISO ones you're talking about, you mentioned Amazon, and Amazon has a couple of options. One
exactly.
is if your testing is being done by a third-party lab, they got to be ISO certified.
Okay. Exactly. Or NSF ANSI standard, which I'll talk about. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make the point that if it's made at a manufacturer that has its own in-house lab and it's NSF GMP certified and it's been reviewed for that, then that's acceptable as well. But
exactly. You're right. And so there's the NSF ANSI standard 173 for dietary supplements. Okay, so
Yeah.
that was developed by NSF and is minimum requirements for testing verification. So, NSF's program was to certify for label claim and safety. Okay, so and if you're using this a manufacturer that's NSF certified or the ingredient that you're using has been certified, that's great. So you have those sort of things in there. The other one is ISO 22000, which is really for food safety, and HACCP is part of that. HACCP is hazard analysis and critical control points. And I've had this argument with colleagues of mine in Europe before, where there's not like there's not a regulation for good manufacturing practices of supplements like in the U.S., right? The FDA has, because you have multiple member states there. But there's guidances in terms of following GMPs and that sort of thing. But there's this perception that HACCP is a substitute for GMPs. No, right? It's only one part of GMPs and a GMP program in terms of good manufacturing practices. And the last one is USP's Pharmacopoeia verification program, which I heard recently they just stopped doing. So I don't know. I have to check on that one, but that's one that's also out there as well. But the main ones, like you just said, Gene, and what Amazon is even actually required is the ISO. If you're using a third-party lab, they're ISO certified 17025, or NSF ANSI standard 173. That's what they're requiring. So those are the standards.
I wanted to just add something. It's not necessarily an official part of our agenda, but it relates to this, and that is a lot of times, especially when I've talked to people who are new in the industry, and they have a brand, and they want to know what's like kind of the minimum amount type of testing that has to be done on my finished product, and so I want to give my thoughts on it, and I'd love to hear yours, Bill. And my thoughts are pretty simple. Every single lot of every single product must have heavy metal testing and must have microbiological testing. Okay, you got to have that on every single lot. For the first time you test your product, you also need to do an assay to determine any of the label claims you have in there. You should test everything for identity and potency. Do the assay for each of those. Now, subsequently, a lot of companies, in an effort to make it affordable to do the testing, they'll do a rotating schedule of tests. Every lot still has micro, and every lot still has heavy metal, but a lot of time they'll do a rotating schedule where they say, okay, if there's 10 ingredients, I'll test 2 as a complete assay, the second time, and then the next time they'll do another 2, and so forth, and they'll keep rotating them. But the first time, you test everything, because you have to have some kind of baseline. Now, ideally, you test everything every single time, but that can get pretty costly if you don't have your own in-house lab. So I would say, at the minimum, that's the kind of thing you need to do. You have to assure safety, all right? And if you have special materials that have their own particular problems and you need to test those, like you gave the ginseng example for, one point in time, then that has to be addressed. What are your thoughts on that, on what people should do as a minimum?
I would segregate that up a little bit, which is kind of what we did years ago in terms of the testing of raw materials and finished products, okay? And even intermediate products, let's say you have blends or something like that, right? So for sure, in the raw material, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good material going, that's where you got to have heavy metals, pesticides, whatever's appropriate for that particular raw material, okay? Before it goes into your tablet or your capsule or powder or whatever. Agreed. You have to have all this, and of course there's micro there, and all those contaminant. This is where you test for all your contaminants, right? Especially like ginseng. I use the example quinacine. This is part of testing for ginseng now. So you do that. Then when you get to your finished product, you have specifications for that, and you have specifications for your finished product. So your specifications basically is what's on your label, supplement facts panel, what's on your label claim, like you said. Whatever the key actives are. If you're saying you have 100 milligrams of vitamin C in there, you better have 100 milligrams of vitamin C at the end of shelf life, right? And then in terms of any other analytes that you need to test for based on what you're claiming to label claim. So obviously testing for label claim and this covers label claim and safety, I want to say. But still today, there's no requirement about efficacy. In other words, or the product actually delivers the benefit. Okay. Well, it's not a drug. It is a supplement. It's a food. So we're not doing that. But more and more people are doing research on their product. So if you have a raw material that's got tons of clinical data and it says you need 300 milligrams, you don't put 100 milligrams and make the same claim in your finished product. It doesn't work that way. Okay, but although I see marketers do this all the time.
Don't get me started, Bill. Don't get me started on that. I'll get up on my soapbox and start talking about clinically relevant doses.
Yeah, so we got a 12-step program for that here. I'm just going to go through in just a second, but to wrap this up. So, so those are my thoughts on that. So look, it requires certain types of testing at different stages of the manufacturing process. That's my point. And whatever's appropriate for the particular ingredient that's necessary in your finished product, whatever you're making claims for. Look, at the end of the day, you want to deliver a product to consumers that actually is safe. It actually has in it what it says it has in it. Now Foods is showing that it doesn't in a lot of cases. So they're doing what Consumer Labs is doing 25 years.
That some other brands don't.
Yeah, some other brands, yeah.
I was just saying, Now Foods are demonstrating not that they're a brand.
Other brand.
To clarify.
Yeah, you're right. Other brands. Sorry. Thank you for that. Okay, so 12-step program here for analytical testing success. Okay, here we go. Number 1, step 1. First of all, you need a qualified, certified, and accredited laboratory, period. If you're going to do it in-house, well, you need to have those accreditations to do that testing. And actually, it's probably better to do it third-party because it's more, it means somebody else tested and got the same results. But again, the watch out's there for whatever testing you're doing. You want to make sure that they're using the right method, that sort of thing. Okay, step 2. If you're developing a program for this, you want to define the scope and purpose, okay, of your analytical testing, right? So why do you need to test it? Let's say you're testing melatonin, right? In different matrices, it's going to require different methods. Yes, there's a USP method for melatonin, but you still have to validate it for your particular matrix, right? So you want to determine what is the scope and purpose of the method you need for the testing, okay? And this is whether it's your lab or it's working with a third-party lab, you need that. Step 3. This is part of your due diligence too, a lot of these steps. So if you don't have your own in-house lab, this is part of your due diligence when you're screening labs you want to work with, okay? So literature review and preliminary research. Okay, so there are tons. I mean, this is what we did as a chemist. I did this. I go look up for all the latest analytical methods to do a testing for a particular component. And they're coming out all the time. And then you take those and synthesize that and come up, and you actually have to do the work in your lab to validate it, right? That leads us to step 4. You need to select the analytical methods best for what you want to do, and the equipment, whether it's HPLC or it's mass spectrometry, chromatography, thin layer chromatography, whatever happens to be that works, that's a validated method. Or whatever's some are more quantitative or more qualitative methods, but you need to have that. Step 5, you have to have a method development. So there has to be an analytical method development. If you're having your particular component, you don't want to end up in the news with your product pulled off the shelf and tested and saying it doesn't meet label claim. So how do you do that? You got to make sure that you do your due diligence on your side of whoever you're using as a third-party lab. So that's step 5. Step 6 is the validation of the method. So ask for that. Say, hey, I want to see your test report for the validation. Have some technical person review it for you. Step 7, you already mentioned this, preparation of the standard and the sample. Really critical because it's going to be different for every single type of test that you do, and you're going to have to validate the method for that particular component, right? There's no one-size-fits-all analytical method or approach to prepping a sample to test for a particular analyte. You got to do it for whatever you're working with. And then actually step 8, the analytical testing, you want to make sure you do all the particular things for the actual testing. Step 9, the data analysis interpretation. So this comes from validating the method. So you have a standard curve, you have the calculations for quantification, statistical analysis, all that is done. There are procedures to do this, and any accredited lab will be following these procedures. Step 10, documentation reporting. Document, report, everything. So, if you're doing this testing, don't just give a copy of a C of A, okay, which I've seen happen. by ingredient suppliers. And then when you press them to do the testing, suddenly they send you the same A. You want to see the test results too. Okay, if you're going to screen a raw material, you got to see the test results. Okay, so that's step 10. Step 11, method review and continuous improvement. Okay, if you make a change to your formulation, if it's substantial, then you're going to have to revalidate the method. Okay, and if you make a change to your product and you're using a third-party lab, you need to let them know, because suddenly they may be testing your sample and say, hey, guess what? We measured this and it doesn't show anything. What happened? All right? So it's way more complicated than people understand, you know? And then finally, step 12.
Can I interject and just give a super quick story?
Yeah.
A contract manufacturer who shall remain nameless had a ubiquinol CoQ10 product. And this was many years ago. And they took that CoQ10 and they combined it with some either vitamin C or vitamin E. Can't remember which. And they put it in a soft gel. And then they tested it at the lab for the ubiquinone CoQ10 content. They couldn't find it. It wasn't there, but they made it. They knew it was there. And then somebody got the bright idea to test it for ubiquinol, the active or reduced form. Ubiquinone is the oxidized form. Ubiquinol is the reduced form. And to make ubiquinone become ubiquinol, you just need a hydrogen. You just need to reduce it. You just need to an antioxidant, you know? And because that was mixed in with it, they tested it and it had become ubiquinol. And so understanding some things like that also become important, so you don't think you did, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah,
anyway.
Well, that's important. That's why step 11 is important. There's always good continuous improvement. I've been through this many times. You change the formula or the dosage form or whatever. You got it's a different sample prep with a different dosage form. These are all considerations. And look, if you don't have a laboratory, that's cool. If you're just a marketer doing that, that's no problem. But then work with a really accredited lab. And if you have to hire a consultant, maybe me, to help you with that. Anyway, step 12, regulatory compliance and quality assurance. Okay, so you want to ensure whatever method you develop that's testing that you have peace of mind that every lot you test for that particular test is going to actually meet the specifications. Okay, and don't be afraid if someone pulls your product and tests it. Don't be afraid to challenge them and say, hey, no, I don't agree with you. This, I don't think so. This is the results from that particular lot in that sample you pulled. This is our results. What method are you using? So don't just take it lying down. If somebody pulls your product, test it. If it was me, I'm going to challenge every part of that. Okay. So again, each of these 12 steps is your program to analytical testing success, and a program that's robust and actually ensures that your ingredients meet label claim, they're safe, and if they're meeting label claim, that means they're probably going to be meeting efficacy as well, because of literature, whatever the amount is you're putting in there supports that. So these are all the important things to do that.
Assuming you put in clinically relevant doses in the first instance.
Of course. Yeah. Well, that's a no-brainer in that one. Yeah. All right. So believe it or not, Gene, we're out coming up on 1 hour. Can you believe that? We could probably go on.
My goodness.
We could probably go on this topic here. So we're going to close it up here, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Please share it, repost it, tell people about it, send us testimonials. We want to continue to grow.
Questions, suggestions.
Ask questions. Yeah, tell us what we have. All kinds of topics we want to talk about, but we know what's coming. We know what the hot topics are in the industry. It's coming up. I mean, there's the new NDI guidance from FDA on that new dietary ingredient. So that's another 1 week show we can get into, right, Gene? And so on and so forth.
That's right.
So that, I'm going to take us out. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr. Bill, and
thank you,
Professor Gene.
Professor
All right.
Gene.
Take care, guys.